Yeah,
Okay, okay, sure.
thank you for having me.
All right.
Um,
Okay.
and I've been very happy to be here. I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation. It's got quite a bit of information packed in it, so bear with me. It may be kind of wordy, but I want to tell the story of who it, how Donald Trump's mind works and how he's gotten the influence he's gotten in the United States and what aspirations he might have internationally and what he might try to do with the US power and where he might try to place the United States in the international system of power in the coming years. So, to get started, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. All right. Is that visible for everybody?
Ah, no. Okay. All right.
Okay. My computer's a little old. It's probably slow. That's probably what it is. Um, All right. Okay, getting started. U.S. foreign policy and international relations, Trump's second term. And again, I do believe the second term looks quite a bit different than his first, but we'll get into that here. Um, yeah, slideshow. Okay. All right. I've got five sections to this presentation. First, what we're going to look at is how Trump how Trump's mind might work, how he might see the world, and we're going to examine some possibilities there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the US system and how he's operated in that context. And then I'll try to apply that to the international system by examining the United States' historic role in international policy and foreign relations, um, and what that might mean to Trump and where he'd like to see the U.S. in the future. And then we're going to look and see what exactly the Trump strategy looks like, the actual nuts and bolts of how he implements his 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 strategy in order to get what he wants from the world, as it were. And then we're going to kind of go over a couple of case studies, or a handful of issues and case studies, and use both the conclusions we can draw from analyzing Trump and his style of leadership, as well as uh, the U.S. and the patterns that have emerged so far. All right, topic one: Trump's worldview. Um, we're going to take a look at the America First policy. That is a very verbal policy. Trump's been very loud about that, both his first term and his second term. This is kind of his buzzword. Then we're going to analyze and kind of just look at some factors to figure out if Trump is a hawk. In U.S. English terms in the U.S., that kind of refers to somebody who is more war leaning, not afraid to get into conflict where violence may occur. So we're going to kind of take a look at that. Then we're going to examine if Trump is a realist. And from international theoretical perspective, we'll get into what a realist is for those who may be unfamiliar with that. And then we're going to look at some of the opposing opinions that I've run into where people say Trump is not a realist. And I'm going to kind of explain what some of those perspectives look like. And then ultimately, I want to go over kind of the political philosophy of competition, which some of you may be familiar with because it's basically looking at the state of nature, the social contract, and the Leviathan. And from the point that we're going to do that, I think it's important to understand how Trump sees those things, and how he uses them. So um, so first, I guess the America First policy, very important because this is literally what Trump says he's implementing. Historically, it was implemented, originally coined by President Woodrow Wilson, but that was in regards to the First World War back in 1916. And it was focused on nationalism, unilateralism, and largely isolationism. They didn't want to get involved in the global wars. They didn't think it was America's problem. But America First as a term didn't really pop up again until Donald Trump. What that means, we're not really sure. I'm curious if he just liked it or if he saw that it historically was used in a similar nationalistic context. So that, looking at the modern use of America First, is interestingly defined by abandoning international treaties and organizations, and sometimes actively ridiculing them, which kind of echoes the original one. It's still nationalistic, it's unilateral, and Trump appears more empowered in the second term than his first term to make it real, to actually implement an America First model. So in some ways, I do see a lot of parallels between both America First movements. And here's some information that Forbes is highlighting to show what America First means under Trump. Trump has pushed an America First foreign policy strategy and has long decried the U.S. spending money on foreign countries that are allies. Again, it's about for Trump, he's concerned about the amount of resources the U.S. is putting to help others. His attacks on Canada also come as his administration is more broadly shut off from most foreign aid and pulled out of international organizations like World Health Organization. There's some examples of him pulling away and trying to pull back on resources that the U.S. is handing out. Trump singled out Mexico and Canada specifically in November following his win, proposing a 25% tariff rate, which is, he's talked about tariffs before with both Canada and Mexico, but 25% is a new high number. It kind of shows that he is emboldened this term, and his negotiating tactics may become even more strong-armed than they previously were, and we'll get into discussing some of those tactics. Trump has also claimed that the tariffs on Canada are necessary due to concerns about undocumented immigrants that come in through the country and the flow of fentanyl, which is a derivative of like morphine and heroin type of things. Um, so that concern is a little bit embellished, but he uses it as a negotiating tactic to leverage against Canada. So in some ways, it shows that close allies don't mean the same thing to Trump as they have to previous presidents. So is he a hawk? Well, he may not be the friendliest politician or negotiator out there. Does that mean he's a hawk or not? Well, there's some debate about that. Some people think that he is, and some people don't. I am sort of on the fence because in his first term, he actually did quite a bit of work in keeping the U.S. out of future conflicts or being entrenched in conflicts, um, as compared to many of the recent presidents. So that I found was really interesting, but he'll say some other things that are conflicting to maybe that anti-war sentiment that his behaviors might indicate. So, for instance, he has denounced previous wars, but he does it on the basis that they don't produce profit for the United States. He laments that the people are taking the wars take up the resources and the United States doesn't get anything back for fighting wars for people, um, which is an interesting perspective about not wanting to fight war. We can all agree war is not a good thing, but in Trump's sense, he's saying that the main problem is that it doesn't produce profit. So if it was a profitable war, he might have a different opinion about it. Trump's primary critique of NATO and the war in Iraq and America intervention in other countries is that the United States, again, is not reimbursed properly for it. So again, it comes down to material wealth and compensation. Um, and again, let's see, I don't mind NATO per se, um, but he believes it needs to be modernized, to fight modern issues such as terror and things. So again, he's not shying away from conflict in these comments, but he's saying that if there is conflict, it has to make sense. It has to be profitable. So that is an interesting context to look at it because it doesn't fit that snugly into too many theories around interpreting policy maneuvering. It's very much more pragmatic. So it can be, again, a little unpredictable. But, that's kind of how Trump likes to brand himself because it makes him harder to read and harder to get leverage on. Um, so is Trump a realist? I believe he is, and I'll get into this full presentation to kind of explain why that might be a very accurate way of looking at him. And I've read many articles supporting that he's a realist. The reason that is the case is because he emphasizes hard power over soft power. It's the military might the ability to defend yourself, the amount of resources you've got. Um, it's not about how much influence you can put over on other countries because you've got access to certain goods that are preferential versus necessary, or it's not necessarily about creating partnerships to consolidate things such as environmental goals and things like that. Because to him, it just again, it's more about the profit. It's more about building material wealth. So obtaining hard power is a direct correlation to building that wealth for him, which is a very realist sentiment. And sovereignty and self-defense is what he continues to say is most important, both with other actors and internationally and the United States. In fact, in some ways, he doesn't seem like he has much respect for countries that can't defend themselves and for countries that he feels are taking money unfairly from the United States. When other countries that have strong military might, democratic or not, he may show more favorable treatment to just because he respects that military might or their ability to take what they want, um, which you might see with some of Russia and Putin. So, and then on top of that, we see a lot of unitary decision making. And I think there's a strategy behind that. I think it's more of a divide and conquer. But again, either way, it's still a very strong sign of a realist. And then rejecting the authority of international agreements. Again, that goes to the idea that the top actors are sovereign countries. The international agreements are just ideas, they're not binding. So he's not going to be as keen to comply with those internationally. And you'll see as we get into domestic politics that he isn't necessarily one for narrow, strict readings of the law either. So if it's even if it says it in the law that something shouldn't be done, if he can find a way to read it more broadly to allow him the ability to do that, he's going to do it. So you can better believe in a setting like the international arena where there's no like binding law that's enforceable, he's not going to comply. So but that's just the way he is. He doesn't see that's a force that he needs to bow to. He's being, I guess, in his sense, realistic about it. So the counter opinion that Trump is not a realist was very puzzling to me. I struggled with this and I looked over and over again to find justification, even though I saw these articles. Sadly, most of the reason people don't think he's a realist is because they're saying he's too dense, he's inexperienced, he doesn't understand the international system. Um, he doesn't even understand international theory or political theory. Uh, he doesn't have enough knowledge to function as a realist. I think all of these are kind of sort of like maybe things that Trump likes to present that he's a little eccentric. So people maybe doubt that he's got the capacity to be a strategist like I suspect he actually is. Um, but that's kind of why I couldn't find a very compelling reason to say that Trump is not a realist, is because most of it was based on the fact that he just is incompetent. And that's up for debate. But I don't think I want to lean in that direction with my conclusion. Um, because again, I've seen so many patterns in what we're going to be going over that I think there is a solid strategy here. And let's see. So the other thing I found very interesting in this argument is that they're saying that by ignoring the balance of power theory, saying that, say, one country becomes way more powerful and tries to exert that power as a hegemony over the rest of the world. The balance of power theory would say that other countries will come together as a coalition to resist that. Um, along the same lines. It's kind of like what the Allies did against the Nazi Germany. I know that was another coalition of Axis and Ally, but again, in this sense, it would be one massive power trying to exert its influence over many other countries. Um, I think Trump acknowledges the balance of power theory, but he's going to challenge it this time. Which I think is one thing that you should kind of keep an eye on. If he really does go out and try to challenge this, as a realist and use unilateral negotiations to try to get what he wants by divide and conquer partners in the international world, um, it could be really enlightening in the world of theory because of the balance of power. It'll provide a lot of information, whether that's that whole idea that countries will come together to resist a hegemony, um, will play out the way that theory says it will. So, that being said, ultimately, let's wrap up this section. I want to talk about the political philosophy of competition. This is kind of a big topic, but I'm going to try to break it down into simple parts so we can kind of understand. I'm going to also put in the context of how I think Trump sees himself fitting into this. So, you know, the starting with political philosophy, we look at the state of nature, which is kind of like anarchy. It's really focused on the idea that all people are in competition with one another, and it's the idea that survival of the fittest or might makes right. You know, you've got to fight for what you have, and you've got to fight to keep it safe and secure. Um, that's a pretty brutal way to live. So society decided to develop this concept of the social contract, where we have norms and expectations of one another, and we live together peacefully. And there's motivations for, but we don't need to get into it today necessarily. But in essence, the idea is that we do agree to live under established set of rules to make competition more fair, less violent, and more orderly. But we still have competition. I mean, that's the whole essence of capital. So, and that's still alive and all over the globe. So, the social contract just allows competition to be more orderly. And we desire order to help us preserve our wealth and our well-being. It makes things predictable. It allows us to understand how to have relationships with other people in the world successfully and to have mutually beneficial deals, as well as, you know, making a little profit for yourself in the meantime. So then the Leviathan comes into this and says, basically, under the social contract, the Leviathan becomes an entity that is created out of the social contract, because those norms and rules that the social contract stipulates with people like Trump don't mean anything unless you have an entity that can enforce those rules and norms. So the Leviathan creates a strong entity to basically create law and order and enforce law and order. And in modern society, in a lot of places, that would be a democratic government where the people have a voice in what the Leviathan's behavior is going to be. So where does Trump fit into all that? Well, I do believe Trump sees the world as a heavily competitive field. So in the state of nature, to him, is an ever existing thing. So even though we have social contracts and Leviathans, how can he still get a competitive edge over the rest of us? How can he get a control over Leviathan? How can he use such power to then influence and leverage others to get what he wants? And that's kind of what I believe his view of the world is. And he's looking at this global landscape and this political landscape through this kind of philosophy of competition. Um, he acknowledges these following things. Each country exists as a sovereign entity, as a sovereign Leviathan. So he's trying to gain as much control over the US as he can, because he sees these strong entities out there that he can get stuff from. And if he wants to get a competitive edge over these other countries, he has to use the US to do it. So Trump has been able to get himself there, and he has majority control over the other branches of government for at least 2 more years. Um, and to him, it seems like he doesn't believe a higher authority exists than his mandate to govern the United States. And in the international world, whatever he's able to accomplish, he's able to accomplish, and there aren't necessarily rules saying he's not allowed to do certain things. So, how does he decide what he's going to do and what he's not going to do? Well, we'll get into that when we get into the strategy pieces. You'll see kind of how pragmatic he can be. But let's kind of look at how he was able to do that domestically, and then we'll look at what that means internationally. So, the US system and Trump's mandate to rule. Um, okay. So, in this section, I'm going to go over the US division of power. I'm sure many of you are familiar with division of power and constitutions. And then Trump's mandate and power, where he feels he gets his legitimacy from, and how strong is that legitimacy, and then the international issues that are prioritized domestically in the United States. And then we're going to kind of get into looking at it from a U.S. perspective a bit. So division of power, there's three branches of government in the US. You got your executive, the legislative, and judicial. Executive is the president, enforces the laws. The legislative, Congress, drafts and passes laws, basically creates laws. And the judicial, they litigate laws and basically lately have been very useful in determining disagreements between the branches of government based on law. Um, so what's been happening has been quite interesting. Uh, so you'll see the comment at the bottom there. I wrote a note there that I've been exploring a little bit that Trump may be implementing a unitary executive theory. And what that is, for those who aren't familiar with the term, it's where somebody in an executive position, such as president, like prime minister would be a tough one, but that can work, or even like a constitutional monarchy, and things like that, where anybody in that executive leadership position is designing the administration, the way the rules are working, and influencing the courts, so that way the power flows more into the president than it does into the legislature or into the judiciary. And right now, if he is implementing that, it appears he's being quite successful. And it's got some people concerned that the executive is becoming too powerful. They're worried that he's building distrust in the legal system, which is a core tenet of a functioning democracy. It's the rule of law. And some people are worried that some of the challenges that have been made, that he's using executive power unconstitutionally to take influence away from the legislature and the judiciary. So as I mentioned, the judiciary, but even the legislature, he's kind of hijacked the power of the purse strings. One of the powers they have over the president in the United States is they get to pass budgets and they get a lot of control over what gets funding. The executive branch this term has taken a lot of that influence and has hijacked some of the spending or has cut off some of the budget approval that has been passed by previous Congress through executive orders. So that one of Congress's most respected and cherished powers to have influence over the president is kind of being taken away from them. And as I said, the courts have also been influenced because Trump has been able to uh, put up quite a few judges in there, and it's almost disappointing. One of the things I'd like to share as a U.S. citizen is we there was a practice in U.S. politics that, say, for instance, under Obama, near the end of his last term, one of the judges' vacancies opened up, and he had the right to appoint someone, but it was so close to the end of his term, and he didn't have control over the legislature that whoever he chose to be the judge was likely not going to be confirmed very easily, and he would likely run out of his term in presidency prior to getting through that whole political challenge. So he left office, even though there was a vacancy. He left office with a court vacancy and didn't select anybody, and he allowed Trump, the next for president, to come in and make that selection. You better believe that Trump would not have done that. He would have selected someone, whether or not he thought he would have been able to get the person confirmed. He would have picked someone and he would have fought tooth and nail to try to get that person in there before his presidential term was over. So that shows that a departure from U.S. convention. I mean, even my political science professors told me it's not so weird for a president like Obama to do something like that. But now Trump is changing the norm, making it less leaning toward political politeness and more toward just trying to secure as much power and influence as he can whenever he can. So again, the main takeaway from what's going on in the U.S., which I can talk about more later, but I just want to summarize right now, is that power is being heavily concentrated under the executive, and there's a major restructuring of government that is it's new information is coming out every day. So I don't even know completely what to expect, but I do see that the executive has a lot of power right now, and the person holding that position is Trump. So, all right. Again, Trump's mandate to power. So how was he able to do all that? So he's got Congress. He's got the courts, the federal courts mostly. He appoints a lot of judges. In fact, some of the judges are being impeached when they want to fight him on a position. So, and MAGA Republicans in Congress are supporting him on this stuff. But interestingly, a lot of presidents in the United States in the last several years have won the electoral college vote, but not the popular vote. That means the majority of people didn't vote for him, but they won a majority of the states, basically the state's electoral support. So Trump in his last election, he did win the popular vote, and he's got the majority in Congress now, and he's got a very strong mandate. And he's not lying when he gets up there and he says the American people voted me in, and I have a right to do this. In a sense, he does. Uh, we just wish a lot of us wish that he was a little more balanced in distributing the power and not trying to center a lot of it on himself. But he does have a strong mandate. So on top of that, the president of the United States is the head of state, therefore, basically the top person in charge of diplomacy and relations. So he's the kind of guy who likes to make all the decisions. And now he's also got the mandate that gives him the confidence and the justification to do so. And he's also got the position that allows him to make pretty much all the foreign policy calls for the United States. So that's why we're focusing heavily on Trump in the U.S. system to look at the U.S. foreign policy and his cabinet. But in the first time he fired a lot of people, and we haven't seen too much of that this time. So it's a factor we're going to talk a little bit about. But it's interesting that it's been a lot more stable this time around. Um, so again, his approach this time is looking much more stable and a lot more strategic. So what are the most prominent international issues in the U.S. media? Well, we talk a lot about tariffs and the economy. That's where he got a lot of his votes from, so it's a major issue. Immigration and drugs, again, that was a major campaign issue. So he depends on a lot of that for public support. Whether or not it's as bad as he says it is, it's hard to say sometimes. Um, Israel, Palestine, and Gaza, that of course is a major international issue that the U.S. is heavily at the center of. Ukraine and Russia, another one where the U.S. has stepped in almost more so than Ukraine in the most recent negotiations. China and national security. China and national security are always major talking points for all politicians here. This time, though, it appears that Trump has pulled in additional issues of trying to secure ownership of Greenland, the Panama Canal, and even including Canada as the 51st state somehow, in order to increase national security, strategic positioning, and also it looks good. It looks really nationalistic for the nationalistic voters who want to be like America first, right? It looks really good. It sounds really cool to them. And if he's able to pull any of this off, it's like a lifelong legacy for him. It leaves a lasting mark on the world that I think he really likes about it. And I think that's part of why he wants to change the name of Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, because he wants to see that on maps before he passes away. So I'm pretty sure he'd like to see that as a permanent global change. So topic 3, the international power structure. So looking at such a powerful person in such a powerful position, um, what does that mean for the rest of the world? Well, let's take a look at the history a little bit. So the phases of international power structure from the U.S. perspective is what we're going to go over first, and then we're going to look at to see how Trump sees the U.S. Like what does it really mean to him, and where is it in the international system, and then how does Trump define power? And then Trump may care more. There's a major concern that we need to look at that Trump may care more about himself than his country. So the phases of the international power structure and position in the U.S. If any of you are familiar with U.S. history, I'm not sure if you've explored too much in the international policy part of it, but I find it very interesting. So that's why I like to put this in here to kind of explain kind of what kind of impact changing in the global power structure has had on, I guess, the morality, or not morality, the morale of the United States, how we feel about ourselves based on how much power we have over the rest of the world. So, pre-World War II, we were very isolationist. That was multipolar. A lot of countries had influence. It was less globalized, of course, than it is today. And there were a lot of theories on how people could be governed and the right way to do it. Um, then World War II occurred. And coming out of that, you had two clear emerging powers that were far more influential across the globe than others, and that would have been the United States and the Soviet Union. That created an era of bipolar struggles. Of course, heavily defined by the Cold War and the competition of communism and capitalism. And sadly, that also brought in some casualties of democracy and authoritarianism because it became more of an economic war than it was a political ideological war. So, but either way, you've got two major powers exerting influence across the world and leaving legacies by doing so. Um, and then after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the during the early part of the 90s into the late 90s, the United States academia classifies that as a unipolar area where there was a hegemony, or the US was the dominant power and had clear influence across all parts of the globe, more so than any other world power. However, they didn't last very long. And by the rise of the BRIC countries and partnerships such as the EU, there were regional alliances and stronger emerging countries that the U.S. just it couldn't kind of swing its weight around anymore. And I do think we had some leadership that was focused on other things mm, than maybe spreading economic influence globally. I think we ended up starting to get focused a lot more on the Middle East, especially by the 2000s, um, and war on terror, which was a huge drain on resources and political will of the United States. So, and that brought us to the multipolar era, where the United States is no longer a hegemonic power. However, I think Trump has aspirations in his America First and Make America Great Again rhetoric. I think that's what he's trying to allude to, is that the US could be a hegemonic power again. It could be the top dog in the world, um, without any peerless, without any competitors that can come close. So how could he achieve something like that? How could the United States exert its influence to rewind the clock just a little bit? Well, it would be similar to what he did in the United States. It's a kind of a divide and conquer tactic. You basically use start to use a strategy where um, you start to create varying realities and disbelief and doubt and chaos, and you make it hard for people to understand what's real and what's accurate. Therefore, creating agreement on things becomes more difficult. Misinformation becomes too constant, and it fragments the way people think and the way they can work together. And I think he's open to doing something like that in the international world. But when we get into the strategies, and we'll talk some more too about how he actually puts that into action. Um, but I mean, in essence, he's going to come in, he's going to make some chaos, he's going to make demands, he's going to suppress what competition he can, and he's probably going to try to make some money. So, um, a follow up to that too, though, is that Trump is not only a president, but he's the head of the Trump family of industry, and it's a interesting situation because that in itself is a multinational corporation. And I believe in today's world, multinational corporations, some of them have larger economies than countries. Some of them have more influence than countries. So when you have a president who is running an MNC and running well, I mean, he's supposed to put some of that to the side, but there's loopholes that he can use. But so he's running an MNC and he's running a country. Does that create a conflict of interest? Well, I mean, I feel like that's a definite yes, but um, he still was elected to be president. So I guess a lot of people believe that he still has the best interests at heart for the United States. But he really might. I mean, there's evidence that shows that he does work hard for it. So now, how does he define power? Like, what is it that he's really trying to get? The answer is unclear, as Trump is pragmatic and chaotic on the surface. However, there are some emerging patterns. So, um, what he does, his behavior, and how he is able to get influence and influence others, some of these patterns, I think, is how he does that. So he pushes the boundaries of law and conventions. He's not a strong believer in rules. He's a believer in what works. Uh, if you can do something and the rules can't stop you, what good are they? So he works against building faith in those kind of institutions. So then it really creates that realist idea of the state of nature, survival of the fittest. If you diminish law and the rule of law, he diminishes trust in sources of information. He claims to tell the truth, and the only good truth comes from him. Some people understand that that's politicians. You should always have suspect of their honesty, but a lot of people follow him and believe that he's there to weed out those corrupt politicians. And domestically, that's part of where a lot of his support comes from. And a lot of people believe what he says and don't trust the other side. Um, in addition to that, he blames opposition for all the problems and takes credits for all his successes. So in that sense, like even the people he surrounds himself with run the risk of being blamed for failures. But it allows Trump to function in a world where things, he looks like he can affect change and accomplish things, like whenever he sets his mind to something. Um, so again, that's like if you're able to do that, then you're in a more powerful position because then when everything goes wrong, you just blame someone else for it and you don't have to pay the piper. You don't have to suffer the consequences. Um, he's not easily pressured by ethical or moral criticisms. I think that's something I found very interesting about international relations and Trump, is since he doesn't cow to that, he doesn't bend to those things. It allows him to be almost like invincible to right and wrong in the international world. So again, conventions, rules, norms, these matter less to him than actual results. And results to him are about making money and accumulating power, which probably are kind of the same thing to him. Um, so again, it focuses on material resources by sacrificing friendships and getting more material resources out of them. To him, that probably means more power. Um, as long as you can leverage those friends to help you out in the future again, then what have you lost? So he avoids putting himself in positions where he must also answer to others. And he has got a strong approach to branding and populist rhetoric used to grow support. I'm sure populist rhetoric um, is something that you see in all countries, and I suspect that's something we need to watch for him on the international world as well, because um, he's quite a manipulative person when it comes to populism. I mean, he insisted on putting his name on the COVID relief checks. And I knew that it was mostly for populism reasons. That way, people felt like they were getting their money for financial relief during COVID directly from Donald Trump. It was clever. So power is measured by influence that you have over others versus them over you. So I would summarize kind of Donald Trump's whole idea of power that if if you can put yourself in a position where no one has influence over you, but you have influence over them, that's really the main thing that matters. That is what power is. Avoiding having to answer to others, but having them answer to you and listen to you and your demands. Um, and again, I think we've been over some of the points of concern. Trump's focus on enriching the U.S. or himself. The age of globalization, MNCs have more power in international system than countries. How does that shape Trump's policies? Does he have conflict with that? Um, and then, his aversion to the rule of law is concerning. So here's the real meat of it. I think this is what many of you have probably been waiting for. This is the Trump strategy. Like how does he do it? And I always enjoyed studying dictators, authoritarian governments, because I wanted to know how are they able to accumulate such power and amass wealth and concentrate influence and power like that. And studying in political science and looking at countries struggling with authoritarian regimes and weak rule of law. Um, I was very concerned when the Trump campaign started the first term, but more so on the second term, because they seem to look at these things too and they know what they're doing. So let's take a look. So, internationally speaking, when you're looking at this kind of realist, dog eat dog, uh, might makes right kind of survival of the fittest mentality, what does that mean for Trump? Well, I think he's set these rules up for himself. So, looking at the state of nature, the world of competition, I believe he sees all actors as competitors, whether they're quote unquote allies, um, enemies, rogue states. They're all competitors. So they all fall under the same category to him. It's just the kind of behavior he's going to show to them might change based on what category he puts them in. But they're still all competitors to him, whether they're friendly competitors or not. I still don't think he would consider them friends necessarily, even if he uses that word. I don't know if his brain necessarily treats them like friends. Um, so that's the first one, and then flood the zone is going to be like where it's kind of like a try all kinds of things, a shotgun approach, where he tries all sorts of stuff. He says all kind of things, overwhelms people with policies, approaches, projects, all kinds of stuff. Cash in on soft power in exchange for hard power. That we've talked a little bit about. We'll talk more about that. He uses all the leverage in negotiation, but never gives any. We'll talk a little bit about how he does it. Take credit for all good things and take no blame for all else. He's very talented at that. And there are still some secrets I haven't figured out. And then how is this different from the past? So, does Trump have allies? It's a lot of words, so I'm just going to summarize some of this for you. Um, my personal belief, again, is that Trump doesn't really see allies and enemies. He just sees other competitors. So here's some quotes that kind of support that. Um, here's an instance where he talks about when another president of another country stood up and said to him, "Well, sir, President Trump, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us?" And Trump said, "No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever they want. You've got to pay your bills. You've got to pay us if you want protection." Boy, that sounds a lot like organized mafia crime back in the day in the US to me. So, very New York, New Jersey style. We were being ripped off by European nations, both on trade and NATO. That's something he's constantly bringing up. And you'll see, we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into NATO discussion. The European Union treats us violently. That's pretty inflammatory words he's using. The European Union treats us violently. They don't take our cars. We take their cars by the millions. They don't take our farm products, very little of it. We take their farm product. That's something that I think will be something to watch this year and see what he does with the EU about this issue. Um, and then another thing that highlights kind of this attitude toward allies is that Taiwan is a very unique case, I think, to watch Trump on. And I just looked up some stuff today, and that there's been some new developments. So, but here, what did he say? He says, let's look at a couple of things. Number one, he knows them well, he respects them, and he really likes their chip business, their microchips and their was it their microprocessors or their the technology for chipsets and AI stuff, and building that infrastructure. So he knows business. The businessman in him sees the value of Taiwan, but he thinks Taiwan should pay us for defense, the United States. We're no different than an insurance company. That's again, it's some ways it's a lot like protection money racket from like the mafia um, the period in the United States when alcohol was outlawed, abolition period, and it creates a market for people to strong arm in the international world. There aren't that many rules, so he's going to go out there and try to strong arm people into deals, even quote unquote allies. It looks like so. Um, this was a very interesting chart I found that uh, really reflected the patterns I was seeing, and I couldn't help but put it in here. And so this could be a little small on some of your screens, but I'm going to try to talk you through a little bit here, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But what to know is this came from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. This is the Trump Prism on Allies. I encourage you all to take a quick look at this if you get a chance, if you're really interested in this stuff. Um, so there are the X and Y axis on this chart. Based on his first term in the office, the campaign statement is Trump's barometers on allies are shaped in two key criteria. So one is whether the country has a trade surplus or deficit with the United States, and two is whether the ally does its fair share on defense spending, which is at least 3% of GDP, but he recently said 5, which is quite a bit for any country. Um, so the graphic shows which NATO and Asian allies and partners are in the danger zone. That would be the ones where they fail on both one and two, or the safe zone where they have accomplished both one and two, with Trump based in these two. So let's take a quick look and see who's in the green. We don't have anybody in the green, largely due to the fact that many countries do not spend that much on self-defense. But he believes that they should because he doesn't want the U.S. spending money on self-defense for other countries. But it's just Latvia. You'll see in the danger zone, there are quite a few countries. So, of course, that doesn't surprise me as a U.S. citizen that we have a trade deficit with a lot of countries. Our labor costs are very high. So I'm not surprised a lot of our manufacturers manufacture in other countries or other countries manufacture and then import to us. It's a cheaper way for the United States to get products to the consumer. However, Trump doesn't like this. He wants the GDP balance to go the other way. He wants to see that deficit change. He wants to be in the favor of the United States. So I suspect that we're going to see he's going to start putting pressure on a lot of these countries in the red zone, especially if there's a weakness and leverage that he can apply to them. Um, Basically, like again, there's Taiwan. It's right there in the danger zone. And if they're concerned about China, then he has something to leverage. He has the threat of violence to leverage against them. It's not violence from the U.S., but it's still violence from a powerful Leviathan, um, another powerful country. So I find that very interesting that we have a president who is focused on balancing trade deficit by threatening friendly countries with violence from other countries that aren't friendly in exchange for trade favors. So this seems to be the emerging pattern right now. But a lot of it's rhetoric at the moment. We haven't seen how much of this is going to play out. We have seen a little bit in Ukraine, and we'll talk about that. And again, that I think is a very educational case to examine. But as you see here, a lot of countries are in that danger zone of potentially facing a Donald Trump coming knocking on the door and asking them to do some favors, or there will be consequences of some kind. But he's got to find the leverage to do it. So what is the second part of the strategy? Well, okay. Well, again, so no allies. Again, we're looking at everybody as a competitor. So then how do you most effectively compete with everyone? Again, so starting with flood the zone and his strategy toolbox. Flood the zone is his strategy for producing change. I think it's quite brilliant, actually, because not only does it create a bunch of opportunity to accomplish things by coming up with all sorts of ideas, but it also it like I said, it just it's kind of like blitzkrieg. It hits the competition or those that want you to fail in such a way that they don't know what to do. They don't know how to react because it's so much. When Trump comes out and he says things like raising tariffs and um, trying to secure Greenland and uh, um, let's see, backing out of NATO, um, coming out with all of that in such a short period of time, it's quite a shake up to the EU. And these kind of things, it's like, well, what does the EU need to focus on? What do the allies within the EU need to focus on? Like, what issues matter to them all equally? Probably very few of them matter equally. And so when you come up with so many issues you're coming at people with, how are they supposed to create allies with one another if they don't always agree on the numerous issues? Or if they might agree, but there's such a pressing matter to them that they need to focus all their attention on that they can't fight this other problem. So it's kind of like, again, it's like Blitzkrieg. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Blitzkrieg, it was a military strategy used by Nazi Germany in World War II, where they would invade a front on a war and break through in such quick and quick and armored military units, and then they would move to the back and create multiple fronts. So those who were attacked with a blitzkrieg, they had to deal with shifting war fronts and multiple war fronts, it was really hard to focus your defense. And that's kind of what Flood the Zone does, is it makes it really hard to defend against someone like Donald Trump because you've got to defend from so many angles. Just imagine being in the United States right now, and if you are an opponent to Donald Trump, he's dismantling federal agencies. He's put an attack on the courts in the system of law. He's he's strangling the power of the purse from the Congress, and he's got a lot of MAGA supporters in there. He's suing states. So all of this happening within such a short period of time, his competitors just they're running around trying to just do damage control. They cannot gain any ground back on him. And I think that's what we can expect in the international world because honestly, that's what I think we're seeing from him already. So, the next piece of this, after you make all these announcements of what you're going to do, what you want, who you're coming after, right? What you're going to demand from people, is you then cash in on your soft power for hard power. So the US traditionally tried to co-opt allies and get partners on board with collective visions and objective. I mean, we see this with the environmental conventions. We see this with human rights. We see it with trade agreements. And NATO is a great example of a defense agreement. Interestingly, now what we're seeing Trump prefers a unilateral approach and coercion in order to motivate partners to comply. So instead of co-opting and collective visions, he's basically coming in and saying, "We need you to do this like this, and here's why, and you owe us." So it's a totally different approach than more of a multilateral approach, and I think this heavily defines him as a realist. And in my view, he's cashing in on the goodwill. This goes even beyond like strategy to the point of like I think um, transformative strategy. He's cashing in on the goodwill that previous presidents have built through these international agreements and partnerships. And he's using that goodwill, he's using those partnerships, and he's using all of that progress that was built and he's leaning on it. He's using it as leverage. He's using that kind of dependence on the U.S. involvement in these soft power type of projects to then get material wealth for it. So he's actually cashing in on decades of soft power that the U.S. has built for hard power. It's an exchange of some kind, and I will be very interested to see if the U.S. comes out with a net gain or a net loss from it. Is the soft power going to pay out in hard power, or are we going to lose too much? That'd be an interesting result. Um, so what's his relationship with leverage? And I think this is one thing to kind of take a look at from strategy side. Leverage is a useful tool, but you also should avoid it um, being used on you. So so Trump's competitive nature seems to define how he sees people, as we've said. He only seems to help those who can help the U.S. and Trump. And if they can't help themselves, then they certainly can't help the U.S., it seems, in his eyes. So if he cuts ties as soon as he stops receiving net benefits from a relationship and uses that as leverage to ensure favorable relationships, then he can perpetuate a system where he's continually able to improve trade negotiations. I just read a very interesting article prior to setting up the PowerPoint tonight about China. And we'll talk about that when we get to the China case study. But it really dug in deep to how Trump could use this leverage and relationship and unilateral approach to get what he wants from Taiwan and isolate China at the same time. It was very interesting. Like I said, I don't think he's as stupid as some people think he is, but he can be as dangerous. So Trump is skilled at redirecting blames. Therefore, it's difficult to hold much against him. Therefore, how do you leverage anything on him? And then Trump shapes facts and builds leverage against others by avoiding using on him. So when you're building doubt in the media and you're creating facts out of your own mouth, whether or not they can be corroborated or established as true, it doesn't matter when there's just no way to prove it. So how Trump is able to get a lot of influence by creating his own reality and marketing it to the world while telling them that a lot of the other things they're hearing is fake. I mean, it's kind of what he said about Zelensky and Ukraine creating the problem for themselves. when a lot of Europe is trying to say, hey, President Trump, Russia started that. Even other Republicans have tried to put remind him of that. But I think he knows. He's just not allowing that to be part of the narrative. So again, creating his own realities. That allows you to basically ignore leverage. So he's really good at ignoring leverage, ignoring ethical leverage, ignoring truths. So it's really interesting that he makes that a strength for himself. And then Trump can do no wrong. So that's about not taking blame. You know, it's you either put it on your opposition. When something doesn't work out, it's your opposition's fault, or it's somebody else's fault below you who did something wrong. And again, it works really well with Flood the Zone because when Flood the Zone, a lot of stuff might fail, but you may get a few wins. Say you try 100 things and only two of them work. Just pretend the 98 didn't happen, or they were someone else's fault. The two things that did work, that was because of Trump, right? That was him. So that's why, he could do no wrong. Everything works under Trump. So, and that's kind of the narrative he continues both domestically and I believe internationally. He's starting to do it. Um, so, uh, the other thing that I've been trying to figure out too is how he looks at winners and losers. And I know he doesn't like to side with losers. That because he then it attaches some sort of liability to him. So for him, it's really about again, it's really not about allies. So then you can go ahead and um, sort of treat other partners any way that is fitting for what your goals are. So okay, so how is this different from previous decades of U.S. foreign policy? Again, isolationism pre-World War II. This is not isolationism. Cold War, it was an arms and tech race led by government. A lot of it's in the hands of private industry now, so that's not really a thing. Strategic alliance to box in communism and USSRs. We're not doing strategic alliances, not that way anymore. And neo-colonial measures to suppress communism and promote capitalism and democracy and spread the U.S. influence and global influence. Um, you could say that those neo-colonial measures might still be present in Trump, but I don't think it's ideological. I think it's all about financial gain and material wealth. So while you might see some neo-colonial stuff, I don't think he's trying to spread democracy. I don't think he's trying to promote capitalism. He's just trying to make some money. Um, and then so unipolar era after the fall of the USSR transitions to multipolar. That was characterized by a liberalization of many economies, the dominance of multinational corporations, the increased threat of terrorism, juggling consequences of neocolonialism. And then it also saw the rise of influence of other world economies and the role of global industrialization and communication. So it, to me, it basically Trump now he's got this world that he has access to through the presidency of the United States that allows him to play with global markets in a whole new way. Um, and he thinks he can do this. I think he thinks he can do this unilaterally, and he's going to try um, to challenge regions of the globe and see if he can divide nations and get material wealth from them on a case by case basis. Now, I don't know if his administration has the bandwidth to do that or how much they can do it, but I think this is going to be part of the approach. Um, so the U.S. struggles with its global identity. Again, struggling with that idea that we're not top dog anymore. It's been hard for him, and to reassert dominance um, is part of Trump's narrative and part of what gets him a lot of votes. So I'm going to move on so we can make sure we have a little bit of time for questions and discussion. Um, so let's take a look and see what we can conclude based on a lot of these details and facts, or I guess things we can extrapolate or pull out of studying the patterns behind Trump. So Trump strategy summary. Again, no allies, only competitors. Flood the zone. Try all kinds of stuff. What ideas or opportunities the administration might have are unknown, thus results in chaos. It can be chaotic because of that. And who knows where he gets some of the ideas. Um, cash in your soft power for hard power. Don't worry about how friendly your relations are with people. in other countries. Worry about what you can get from them. Use all leverage in negotiation, but never give any. So again, like never relent in negotiations. Use everything you can, and once negotiations concluded, you should be, in Trump's mind, he should be pretty close to the target of what he was asking for in the first place because he's just relentlessly goes after that negotiation goal. Um, so and never take the blame for things that don't work out because that diminishes your power, diminishes your influence, and it allows people to use things against you. So, Trump, in my opinion, I conclude that Trump is a realist. He negotiates like a realist. Um, Unitary decision making, hard power, sovereignty is key, self defense, rejecting authority of international agreements, and participation unequally in those things. And he's very much campaigns and governs on a nationalist platform. Um, so Trump believes in global business and trade. And I believe this is a modern realist thing. Like realism evolves as does globalism, and Trump believes in global business and trade, but he must favor the U.S. That is the realist approach because he is president of the U.S. And he will use whatever leverage he can, even the threat of violence, to make a deal, as I brought up in cases where he's said that he will withhold defending someone from an aggressing country because they're not paying their bills. So to me, when it comes to the international world, he just sees an arena to dominate, not a forum for discussion or collaboration, just something the next step. Yes, he's got the presidency of the United States. How much higher can he go? How much more power can he accumulate? So, so prominent IR issues in the U.S. media. So some of the things we're going to look at now: the Israel, Gaza, Hamas, Palestine situation, China, national security, Ukraine, Russia, NATO, and EU relations, tariffs, immigration, drugs, and crime, and then the Greenland, Panama, Gulf of Mexico, and Canada. Uh, I guess topics. Those are very interesting in the sense of like I'm not even sure what kind of category they are. So, all right. So Israel, Gaza, Hamas, and Palestine. Let's see if I can. Let's see. All right. Make sure. All right. So these are going to be best um, my best conclusions, but I'm just putting them out there as an equal to all of you. I don't claim to be an expert on these. I don't claim to have a crystal ball, but based on what patterns I've been seeing and what I've put in this PowerPoint, I'm going to see if I can reach some conclusions on some of these things. And I encourage you to explore some of the interpretation of Trump's foreign policy and see what kind of conclusions you could reach on some of these topics. Um, but I do know that U.S. news covers different things than other news media. So again, this is heavily what we see in the U.S. So the Israel, Gaza, and Hamas Palestine situation. So recently, there's a lot of talk about developing Gaza. I mean, Trump said it could be like the Riviera of the Middle East. I mean, that's very Trump for you. Um, I think a lot of inflammatory rhetoric. He's trying to instigate things. He's poking. He's trying to create contention and conversation because I think by doing so he creates openings for negotiations. I think that's part of his tactic. Sometimes for the better, sometimes not for the better. But I think it's part of why he does what he does, to get people talking so he can get into negotiations to get what he wants. So, what does Trump want by supporting Israel in the sense of like relocating a lot of Palestinians and basically emptying Gaza for reconstruction, redevelopment? It's likely that Israel would be the ones allowed to move in. The Israeli population would be the ones allowed to move in, or it would just be a quote unquote unmanaged oversight or activity where the U.S. has come in to support a reconstruction effort, but then doesn't take the role of like forcibly making sure that occupation doesn't occur by Israel. That would be something that I'd see would happen. It would just kind of be like we turn a blind eye situation, and then there's no there. Even if we fix everything up, there's not going to be any place for Palestinians to come back to because it's all going to be occupied. So, well, the question then is, will Hamas be able to make a deal with Israel without a U.S. endorsement? That I don't know. That's a tough one. I mean, this has been an ongoing conflict for a long time. Um, uh, at least or since the conclusion of World War II, I believe. So, I mean, the future of Palestine is still uncertain, and I think Trump being president in IR isn't going to change anything for them. In fact, it may make things worse. For them to make it better, I think they'd have to offer him something. What do they have? What do they have that Trump could be persuaded to make an exchange on? Um, I don't think they have much to give him, and so I don't think they're going to get much from him. But ultimately, will at least some of the aid continue? Well, with the dismantling of some of the federal agencies, that's also a big question as well. So it doesn't seem like things are looking great for Palestine. Um, but also in current media, a current news cycle, it did appear that Egypt has put some pressure back on Trump that this whole idea he has about development and what he's planning to do with the population that's currently in Gaza is inappropriate, and he's got no regional support. If he doesn't have regional support, doesn't have any place to put everybody or any means to move them, he might have to be more flexible on how he envisions his goal there. So don't see a lot of movement on that yet, and I'm not sure if there will really be much successful negotiation between Hamas and Israel. The U.S. may not even the U.S. may sabotage some of that, maybe inadvertently or maybe on purpose. Can't say for sure. Um, So then let's look at China and national security. So China and Taiwan. Again, this is I found very interesting because he does seem much more aggressive with China this time around. He's always been more aggressive, but I think again he's emboldened this time, and he's definitely more aggressive with China than he is with most other countries. Tariffs have always been a topic of conversation, and then investment restrictions as the America First investment policy. So the America First investment policy is one that he's putting together that emphasizes um, opening investment opportunities for priority countries, and that would not include China. He doesn't want to provide them more ability to exert influence by having more financial investment in other countries' economies and things like that. So he certainly doesn't want that in the U.S. Um, and Trump in Taiwan, again, originally he had some pretty strong language to say about them taking, protecting themselves and paying the bill if they need us to do it. But recently, the U.S. State Department has removed a highly symbolic phrase from a routine. In fact, I think it was the February 13th, and this is mind blowing to me. I didn't expect this. They removed the line that we do not support Taiwan independence. So basically, it looks like they're moving toward an idea of Taiwanese independence. So the other piece of this is that Donald Trump's new government also stated, so folks in his administration have also stated on February 13th that it advocated a peaceful and coercion-free resolution to the issue and opposes unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. That I see as sort of a double-edged sword in the sense of like it's great he's endorsing a solution for Taiwan to be independent potentially, but he also says that Taiwan and China don't do it without us. So he's got things he wants out of it, and he's going to make sure he gets involved. Interestingly, it reminds me a lot of what happened with Ukraine. And in fact, he might be looking at that as inspiration for how he can be successful here too. Um, but again, I find that Ukraine was the loser in that one, and I'm afraid that Taiwan is in a scary situation because now it's got to worry about the China and Donald Trump trying to exert some sort of leverage over it or influence over it. Um, so Ukraine, Russia, and NATO. I think we covered that one quite a bit. But again, it's sort of a similar situation where the U.S. and Ukraine have come to agreement on. They finally came to agreement, I think, on the mineral rights To me, as a citizen of the U.S., though, it blows my mind that a country that I mean, in theory, we've been fighting authoritarian attitudes like Putin and Russia, the political culture of Russia and corruption for my entire life. And I mean, I was born right about the time the Berlin Wall fell. And so, like, to me, seeing a president say that, you know what, we're not going to back Ukraine unless they give us enough money to do it, even though that Russia has unfairly come in and taken a bunch of land, it just blows my mind. It's very un-American to me. But again, Trump's opinion is that it needs to be fair. We need to be compensated. And why should we protect other countries if they can't protect themselves? Again, he's going against this idea of these coalitions or these associations of nations coming together to fight hegemonies or these powerful aggressing nations. Um, he's almost trying to create a space where he legitimizes powerful aggressing nations. I'm afraid because he feels the U.S. could become one more so than it is. So, but he'd like to at least see the fighting stop. He just wants to get paid for it. Um, on the other side of that, with Russia, though, there's a lot of discussion in the U.S. about Putin and Trump. I think part of why Trump is friendly with Putin is because they have a lot of similar methods in how they govern, but I think a lot of legitimacy can be provided by, supporting the attitude that rulers or, leaders like Putin can exist legitimately. And then that could potentially provide more power for Trump in the future. So again, that benefits himself. So, and then tariffs. Trump has spoken on the use of reciprocal tariffs. He really likes this. He really likes protectionist economies idea of the U.S. I'm not sure if it's just because of voting, because I know the guy knows how to make money and knows how to do international business. But I think on the campaign trail, tariffs were huge. So I'm curious to see if he actually implements the use of tariffs as widely as he says he is, or if he's just using it for domestic politics reasons. Um, I do think that he's likely to do it with some countries, though. As I mentioned when we were looking at that graph of what countries are in favor of his and which countries are not. I do think he could be knocking on some doors, though, demanding better trade arrangements or tariffs will be the result. How aggressive is he going to be about it? He's probably going to use unilateral negotiations to try to coerce trade partners into deals more favorable. And his the best defense would likely be forming unified trade alliances that push back against Trump. Again, countries are going to have to come together to push back against his demands. Immigration, drug crime, a lot of this is also domestic politics. He creates a narrative, but then he's also been using that narrative he's created to get domestic votes and support for his administration. He's been using the same narrative to kind of blame Canada and Mexico for stuff and using that as leverage against them. Whether or not, again, it's true or based on fact, doesn't seem to matter because it's having a result. It's producing effective results in getting Mexico to spend more and provide more security at their border. It's getting Canada to also provide a little more support. But Canada has been a little more critical of Trump's statements than I think Mexico can afford to be. It'd be interesting to see how Canada deals with the U.S. in the coming years. So what is the value in gaining? So let's talk about that. Greenland, Panama, Gulf of Mexico, and Canada. What's the value of gaining influence over these? Well, it's pretty obvious to me that he's doing this to leverage trade, national security, controlling foreign powers, and reducing the influence of China. I mean, the Panama Canal is a critical spot. Greenland allows a lot of global influence from the Arctic Circle, and then the Gulf of Mexico. I think that's just bragging. So Trump will likely not stop pushing the issues as a form of pressure and leverage, part of the whole flood the zone method. And he's going to use rhetoric to build domestic support with nationalists. And if he is successful in accomplishing any of those, again, it's bragging rights, and it allows him to have a legacy that lasts beyond his lifetime. So, I mean, he's going to be in the history books if he's able to add any of those to the property of the United States, or even change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. So we're almost at the end here. Just a couple more slides. Here's some things I think you should watch for if you are really interested in international relations and you want to try to figure out who Trump is and how his mind works and what decisions he might make and what kind of actions he might take. I would say in order to kind of figure out the patterns, you should watch closely the kind of leverage he's using, like specifically what kinds and what cases on what countries he's using to get foreign nations to comply, and if he's using certain kinds far more frequently than others. What kind of benefit does he try to obtain from deals? Is it trade? Is it mineral rights? Is it more military involvement from the country that he's negotiating with? So, what is it that he's looking for from other countries? Is there an overwhelming pattern there? Has he ever instigated or used any existing dispute to start a negotiation process? Yeah, I think he already's done that. I think we should watch to see if he continues to do that and look for openings to get material possessions or wealth where the U.S. probably didn't really have any reason to do so or any justification to get those items. Again, I'm sort of mixed on Ukraine. So how does he utilize the resources of the United States abroad? That's again, what is he going to do with military power? What is he going to do with our investment power? Is he going to continue to participate in any sort of aid, financial aid or medical relief aid or anything like that? How does he utilize the resources of the United States abroad? Sorry, I read that one already. What has his approach gained for the U.S. so far? What has approach cost the U.S. so far? So always put those two in measurement, basically a cost benefits analysis. And then what countries does Trump treat like allies in the conventional sense? So far, I haven't seen any, um, because I think Trump has his own brand. But if I do notice one that he treats as a conventional ally, I'll be sure to note that and try to figure out why. And what differences between his first term and second term? Is there more confidence? Will there be more consistency in staffing? That's one that I think is the key to watch there. Who's going to continue to be staffed in his administration is going to have a huge influence on what his foreign policy is going to be. And right now, he's got some hawkish types in there. So again, I think he's going to be fairly aggressive on China. But if he fires a bunch of people and restaffs it, things could change. So, word of advice that I got from a political science professor of mine, my advisor, that I've always found valuable in kind of trying to figure out how power flows in different power structures. He always said, follow the money. So I think in this essence, both international relations and in U.S. domestic politics, if you want to dig more into that, follow the money. And isn't it ironic that Elon Musk, the world's richest man, is so prominent in Trump's administration? So all that being said, um, where what more can we conclude in international relations? Again, this is just one interpretation of who I think Trump is and what he might do. But we've got a lot of time for a lot to happen yet. But I've created a couple of questions here just in case we had extra know that we're running low on time as it is, so don't worry about these. I did just want to say, one of those questions is how do U.S. citizens feel about current administration's international relations approach or the current administration in general? I just want to talk real briefly about that because I know that's something that you might be interested in. Generally, there's a lot of apprehension about Trump. A lot of it is due to the fact that he uses a lot of authoritarian and non-democratic processes to concentrate power under the presidency. And concentrating all that power under the presidency makes people very concerned about constitutionality of what he's doing. On the flip side of it, though, is like I said, he's got a very strong mandate. He's got a large coalition of allies in government in different branches. So sometimes cleaning house and restructuring can do some good by tearing down what's old and building it up with what's new. Is it going to work? I don't know. Do the means justify the ends? I personally don't think so. I think what he's done to the institutions of democracy, faith in the media, faith in the legal system, isn't worth whatever benefits he's going to produce for the United States in its wealth and power. I think our cherished democracy is far more important in promoting principles of democracy and egalitarian society is, I guess, to me, more important than taking wealth from other nations. But it's hard to do one. It's hard to do the one if you don't have enough wealth to exert your influence on other nations. So, again, the realists might have me. I'm an idealist, but sometimes, the realists have a pretty good case to make about how the world works. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead
Yeah,
and
I think we run out of time. And some students have class at 1 p.m., so they might have to leave early to have lunch or something. So I think we have time for like one question if student have question for Carl. มีนักศึกษามีokay. I think we have two, and you can combine together if you may. โอเคไม่ต้องส่งมาแล้วนะไม่รับคำถามแล้วนะจ๊ะ
okay. So, Southeast Asia to Trump. Oh, super important. A serious source of manufacturing, a serious sort of trade. I would honestly be a little concerned for Asia, especially Southeast Asia, with the attitude he's taking. I think he's going to come in and try to push some of the countries around, and demand more favorable trade agreements and even some manufacturing stuff. I know Thailand is very protective over investment and its economy. He might try to change that. It's very possible. But Thailand and some other of the Southeast Asian countries may be slightly low on the priority list. But then again, with Flood the Zone, he may try as much as he can, and he'll take whatever wins he can get about more favorable trade agreements and investments in international trade. So that's what I think is important to Southeast Asia for him. It's always about the money with him. I think it's business, and a lot of manufacturing and trade comes from Southeast Asia, especially for the West Coast. Right. Oh yeah, the third parties thing. One of my personal pet projects about the U.S. system is we are very what's the word, homogenized. We kind of had some genocide with our native populations, and we had a very white centric development in the beginning. So we kind of have this one nation identity inside of the country. But with modernization and globalization, with immigration and all of these people who came from different parts of the world over the couple hundreds of years, I think it's time for the U.S. to consider a parliamentary system so we can have multiple parties. Because you're right, that winner takes all system mathematically cannot produce a third party, only temporarily until one of the other parties reforms, so it can regain the power to fight against the other opposing party. Because the math of it only makes two viable parties possible. So yeah, either we do constitutional reform and go parliamentary, or we're going to be stuck with a two-party system for the rest of that time. So I'm not optimistic we're going to see a viable third party until constitutional reform. And I don't know if that's going to happen in my lifetime. So
Elon Musk as the true president.
Oh, yeah, there's talk about that. Again, if you look at what I came up with Trump there, though, Trump is really focused on getting leverage against others, but not letting others leverage him. It makes me wonder if Trump is using Elon as a scapegoat when things hit the fan, because something is going to break. The courts are already starting to get more worked up in stopping some of the things. And I think it allows Trump to have somebody he can do that with. But at the same time, Elon is such a wealthy, powerful, influential person that I have to wonder what the dynamic between the two of them really is. That's a mystery. And that's one of the things a lot of Americans complain about, is that mystery makes us all worried that we don't really know what Elon's doing in the Oval Office and in the government. Like, where's the accountability for him?
So maybe this is like the only time that he can play president. So he, he takes this opportunity.
Right. Well, he could never run. I believe is a South African citizen, so he doesn't qualify. You have to be a natural born citizen and to be president of the United States. There's talk of changing that. I mean, if you remember Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was governor of California, he would have probably had aspirations had he been able to, but he wasn't allowed. So the law said so. Um, yeah, Elon can't either. But I think this new era like of these rich moguls, especially the tech sector, I think they see international stuff differently. I don't think they um, see the international world as a bunch of powerful countries. I think they just see it as a bunch of competing countries, and MNCs are also just a bunch of competing entities. I mean, in the United States, our legal system has basically allowed corporations to be classified as people. So, um, for those who do business here, it becomes part of the mentality of that's just kind of how life works. And I I feel like they just see countries as just more places to build wealth and do business, and national boundaries to them mean much less than to most of us who don't do business like across international borders every day. So, I mean, but I think, he probably doesn't appreciate the power of a country as much as many of us do, since he runs a business that's more powerful than many of
Mm. Anyhow, so thank you so much for your insight about Trump's administration and his policy. I think I learned a lot from your lecture today and also the student as well. Thank you so much for giving us time, and I know that you take a lot of time to prepare for a talk today. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's no problem. And I can send you a copy of my PowerPoint.
That would be great.
My resources, I haven't formatted them correctly, but the links are in there. But I can send you a copy so that it's available.
All right, thank you so much. It's too bad we don't have enough time for more questions, but hopefully next time. Thank
Oh,
you.
yeah, that would be-
บา
yeah.
ย
Well,
ขอบคุณ
thank you
ค่ะ
for having me.
น้องมิ้งขอบคุณค่ะสวัสดีค่ะบ๊ายบาย